Dear students, welcome you all for the session on residential status of individual. So, how to determine residential status of an individual as per the Income Tax Act. So, this is what we are going to discuss in this particular session. So, let's move on. What is residential status as per the Income Tax Act? So, residential status of an individual is this is a term coined under Income Tax Act and has nothing to do with the nationality or citizenship of a person. That means residential status is purely determined or computed based on the number of days of stay in India. So it is not connected with your nationality nor citizenship of a person. That means you may be an Indian national but you may not be resident in India. You may be Indian citizen but you may not be resident in India. So what that means, an Indian who is a citizen of India can be non-resident for income tax purpose. In the sense, if you are not stayed the required number of days as specified by the Income Tax Act, that means you are not a resident in India. Whereas an American who is a citizen of America can be resident in India for the income tax purpose. That means he has stayed required number of days as per the Income Tax Act in India. So he becomes a resident even though he is a American citizen. So, incidence of tax of any assessee depends on his residential status under the Act. That means on what incomes you have to pay tax. So, what is my incidence of tax? That is determined based on my residential status. So, if I am resident, I have different set of incomes which is taxable in India. If I am non-resident, I have different set of incomes that is not taxable in India but taxable in a country where I am resident. So that is very, very important. So based on that only we can say that whether you have to pay tax or not to pay tax in India. Then residential status is classified as follows. First one is resident. So in resident itself there are two classifications, ordinary resident and not ordinary resident. So that is the second one, resident but not ordinary resident. Then third one is a non-resident. So, as I said, in resident itself there are two classifications, ordinary resident and then this one, not ordinary resident. So, I will explain this in this particular chart. See here. So, here I have mentioned residential status of individual as well as companies, firms, AOPs, local authorities. Okay, let's see individuals. So, in individual, mainly there are two classifications. Even for companies also, mainly two classification, resident, non-resident, resident, non-resident. But for individual, there is a further two classification in resident. So that means if you are resident, then it is further tested whether you are resident and ordinary resident or resident and not ordinarily resident. So it is based on the different conditions. So in order to become a resident, you have certain conditions. In that itself, if you are fulfilling some additional conditions, then you become an ordinary resident. If you don't fulfill, then you become a not ordinary resident. But for companies, AOPs, it is a different classification in the sense resident or non-residents. If the control and management is controlled in India, then it is resident. If it is not that, then it is a non-resident. So that is for companies and firms. Okay, then residential status of individual. Let us discuss in detail how the residential status is determined for individuals. What are the various conditions? Okay, what are the various conditions to be fulfilled to become an ordinary resident? So let's discuss. Okay, so to become a resident under section 6 subsection 1 of the Income Tax Act, an individual has to fulfill any one of the two conditions during the previous year. See, residential status we are calculating only for the previous year. So in that previous year, he has to fulfill any one of the two basic conditions. So what are those two basic conditions? The first one is an individual assessee must be in India for at least 182 days or more during the previous year. That means he has to stay minimum of 182 days, okay, or more. You can stay any number of days, more than 182 days. So if he is staying in that number of days, then he is considered as a resident in India. Okay. There is another condition also. If at all individual is not able to satisfy the first condition, then he can also try to satisfy, or he can be satisfied the second condition. So second condition says, so individual assessee must be in at least for 60 days in the previous year. That means in the previous year he should be 60 days, that's all, not 182 days. But it says further, what it says, 365 days or more during the 4 years immediately preceding the previous year. So in the 60 days in the previous year. So after that 4 preceding years he should be 365 days. So he should be in India for 365 days. So leaving the present previous year. So what is the present previous year? He has to stay 60 days. Leave that. So if he fulfills, go to the preceding four previous years. In that he has to be in India for more than 365 days. But there are certain exceptions to this 60 days. So let's see what are the exceptions. Very important, that one. So exception to the rule of 60 days. Section 6 subsection 1b. So following cases individual has to stay 182 days or more. So for following persons 60 days rule will not apply. They have to stay 182 days or more. So who are those persons? Let's see that one by one. First one, Indian citizen who leaves India in any previous year as a member of the crew of an Indian ship. So usually ships travel to different countries, different places. So if a person, Indian citizen is employee of that ship, then he has to stay 182 days or more to be called as a resident. That's the first exception. Second one, again Indian citizen. So these terms are very important. So Indian citizen leaves India for the purpose of employment outside India. So you are leaving India for the purpose of employment to outside India. That means you are working outside the country. So in that case, if you want to become, or if that person considered as a resident, then he has to stay more than 182 days. Then third one, Indian citizen or person of Indian origin. So he can be both Indian citizen or person of Indian origin engaged outside India in an employment or business or profession or any other occasion, who comes on a visit to India. So he may be outside for an employment purpose or business or profession or anything. Okay, but he is coming on a visit to India in any previous year, then he has to fulfill 182 days or more, not 60 days. So these are the 3 exceptions. Okay. Yes, let's move now. So what I have said, okay, once an individual is determined as a resident, then we have to see whether he is ordinary resident and not ordinary resident. So ordinary resident and not ordinary resident. So once an individual is qualified as resident, the next step is to determine whether ordinary resident or not ordinary resident. So following additional conditions shall be applied. That means he has to fulfill. So what are those? First condition, resident in India for 2 out of 10 previous year preceding the relevant previous year. That means he has to be resident. So in order to become resident, you have to fulfill any one of the 2 basic conditions that I have already discussed, 182 days or 60 days plus 365 days in the 4 preceding previous year. So he has to fulfill any one of the 2 basic conditions. So then he is considered as a resident. So he has to be resident for at least 2 years out of the 10 preceding previous years. Then he can be ordinarily resident. Then second condition, stay in India for 730 days. So he has to stay 730 or more in the last 7 previous years preceding the relevant previous year. So for the past 730 days, he has to stay. How many days? He has to stay 730 days. Okay, so if he is there 730 days or more in India, then he is fulfilling the second condition. So here these are the 2 additional conditions. So what happens? Who is a resident and ordinary resident in India? So if the individual satisfies both the additional conditions, okay, that means he has to fulfill both these 2 conditions. Okay, both the conditions has to be satisfied in order to call him as an ordinarily resident. Then he becomes an ordinarily resident. If it does not qualify both the additional conditions or satisfies any one, then he is considered as a not ordinarily resident. So this is very important, ordinarily resident and not ordinarily resident. So ordinary resident in the sense he fulfills both the additional conditions, okay, and not ordinarily in the sense he may not fulfill both. He may fulfill either one or may not fulfill both also. Then he becomes not ordinarily resident. Now who is a non-resident? So we have discussed resident, not ordinarily resident, and now third one is non-resident. Who is a non-resident? Very simple. An individual does not satisfy any one, there is a spelling mistake here, any one of the basic conditions mentioned in section 6 subsection 1, then he is known to be non-resident in India. So an individual does not satisfy any one of the basic conditions mentioned, that is 182 days and 60 days plus 365 days, then he is known as a non-resident in India. Very simple. If he doesn't fulfill, straight away he is a non-resident in India. So some important points to note. Person of Indian origin means, so there is a word called person of Indian origin. Who is this? So either assessee or his parents or grandparents or great grandparents are born in India. So that particular person is called as a Indian origin. Now these days there was a US election and the vice president nominee, that is Miss Kamala Harris, is known to be Indian origin because her parents were from India. Then the day of visit or day of leaving India should be considered as two separate days. I have already told you that. So day of visit and day of exit, both should be considered. Then residential status is determined for previous year. That also I have told, only for the previous year, not for the next year. Okay. Then a person can be resident in one or more countries at the same time. That means a person can be, as I said, can be resident in one country, and at the same time he can be resident in other country also, provided he fulfills the rules of that particular country. So you can be resident in one or two countries at the same time. So this is what regarding the residential status of individual. So thank you for watching this video. Thank you.